Friday, August 15th, 2025, and welcome back to Matters of Policy and Politics, a Hoover Institution podcast. I'm Bill Whalen. I'm the Virginia Hobbs Carpenter Distinguished Policy Fellow in Journalism here at the Hoover Institution, but I'm one of several fellows who are podcasting. I recommend you go to our website, which is hoover.org/podcast, and check out what we offer to you. We cover the waterfront of issues. It's great stuff if you like to listen to pods when you work out or travel or drive in your car, whatever you. So definitely check out the Hoover podcast. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go back in time and then back to the present to talk about some elements that they have in common. This would be talk about empires, the health of republics, and the condition of the Jewish people. And joining me today to talk about this is Barry Strauss. Barry is the Hoover Institution's Corliss Page Dean Senior Fellow, as well as the Bryson Edith M. Bomar Professor of Humanistic Studies Emeritus at Cornell University. He's also a military and naval historian with a focus on ancient Greece and Rome and their lessons for today. Barry Strauss is a winner of the 2025 Bradley Prize in honor of his dedication to the study and teaching of Western civilization and classical military history. That passion is evident if you read his latest book, which is hot off the presses. It's titled Jews versus Rome, 2 Centuries of Rebellion Against the World's Mightiest People. Barry, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here.
So since I referenced your Cornell roots, let me now get you in trouble with your friends back in Ithaca. Be honest, it's about 75 degrees outside here in Northern California today. Not a cloud in the sky. Tell me this is a better place to live than Ithaca.
Yeah, the weather is a bit of an upgrade here. I love Ithaca. It's very beautiful, but the weather, California wins in the weather department without question.
Okay. Now make the case for Ithaca. What's better about upper state New York than Northern California?
Living is easy. No traffic. Daily life, absolutely hassle-free living. And I have a lot of friends there. So
okay. Let's talk a couple of minutes about what brought you into this profession, Barry. Why the attraction to history? Why the attraction to ancient history, military history, naval history?
Golly, I felt that history is in my blood. My dad and his father were both combat veterans of the U.S. Army. My grandfather in World War I in France, my father in World War II in Italy. And I grew up with this book on the shelf called The Road to Rome, showing American soldiers heading towards the Eternal City. And I guess I was just fascinated by it. My grandfather always wanted to tell the story of his emigration from Russian Poland to the U.S., becoming a U.S. citizen, then going off to France and fighting. Somehow he never got around to it before his untimely demise, but it was always in the back of my mind, always something that interested me. I think also the fact that I come from a large family, many relatives from my grandparents' generation. They all had come from Europe, and I just thought I was quite fascinated in where all this came from. So I always wanted to know.
Interesting dichotomy of World War II is if you look at the great European capitals, London obviously gets blitzed, Berlin gets decimated, but Paris gets off pretty easy, and Rome gets off pretty easy too.
Yeah, relatively easy. Yes, they do. Absolutely.
All right, let's play a little pop culture here for a minute before we get into the more serious academic side of things. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, Barry, into this ongoing fascination that we have with Rome in our society. And I'm old enough to remember, Barry, back in the 1970s when PBS devoted considerable time, energy, and treasure to I, Claudius. I
Yes.
remember in the 1980s when the very sordid Bob Guccione of Penthouse Magazine fame poured a lot of money into this really, really kind of bad movie called Caligula, just showing Rome at its most decadent.
Yes.
I don't know if you did, but I certainly did. I saw Gladiator in the theaters, and Russell
Absolutely.
Crowe gets an
Yes.
Oscar for it. I don't think the
Yes.
sequel really was as good, but it's hard to match the original sometimes.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the HBO series Rome, Barry, which
Yes.
chronicled the lives of some soldiers and just the politics of Rome and society there.
Yes.
But here's what I'm curious about, Barry. I watched something like Rome, and I noticed 2 things. These Romans have kind of vague British accents. They all seem to have good dental plans. And I don't think ancient Rome, especially on the dental side of things, I don't think that was the case.
No, the dental plans, not the case of ancient Rome. As far as the British accent, though, there's something to be said for it because the Romans were the imperial people, and as Americans, we, in particular, we look at the Brits as the imperial people par excellence. We still think of empire as speaking with a British accent.
Mhm.
Certainly was the case in American history. So also, Romans stand for culture with a capital C, and for the study of Latin, which also recalls British roots
Mhm.
and a more European style of education than we're used to in the United States. So the British accent is, there's something not inauthentic about it, if I might say. It's pretty
All right.
appropriate.
If you watch the series Rome, everything is very cunning. Everything is very strategic. Life is just
Yes.
one of constant calculation. Was life in ancient Rome really that complicated?
For the elite, yes, it definitely was like that. I mean, if we read Cicero's letters, which are just these wonderful documents, many of which were never meant to be published, we just get this behind the scenes look of what Roman society was like, and indeed, constant calculation. Personal relationships were everything. Who knows who? Who's zooming who? As the song says. That's absolutely essential for Roman society. So there's a degree of accuracy in that picture. Yes, indeed.
Mhm. And it's also a series about upward mobility and opportunity. And so these two fellows end up in all sorts of odd situations,
Right.
close to
Yes.
Caesar and Cleopatra and Augustus and so forth. Was upward mobility really part of the Roman experience?
It was. I mean, nothing like the modern Western or American experience, nothing
Right.
like that. But yes, upward mobility was a possibility, particularly in the good years of the Pax Romana.
Mhm.
So, say from Augustus on for the next 200 years, there was a lot of upward mobility. And even afterwards, there was a lot of upward mobility. I mean, after the emperors almost never come from the Roman elite,
Right.
let alone from Italy.
Mhm.
They're coming from all over the empire, and Rome is a society in which ultimately the immigrants rise to the top, and the old Romans fade away. So, yeah, I mean, there wasn't as much mobility, mass mobility, as there is in modern society. The ancient economy simply wouldn't permit that. And also, let's not forget this is a slave society,
Right.
so there's an enormous number of people at the bottom. Although the opportunity to buy your way out of slavery existed in antiquity in a way that it hasn't in modern slave systems. But
Mhm.
so a degree of social mobility, indeed.
Barry, yesterday I had the chance to sit down and speak for the better part of an hour with Victor Davis Hanson, an interview for
Right.
a podcast. The
Yeah.
occasion was the 100th issue of a publication at Hoover called Strategica, which
Right.
is very clever. It takes current warfare, current problems, and
Yeah.
goes back in time to draw parallels and so forth. Here is Victor Davis Hanson, like yourself, a historian. He's a classicist.
Right.
He is giving a lecture at Hillsdale College in October 2023, Barry, the title of which is Will America Suffer the Same Fate as Rome? Question mark. Here's a publication, The Conversation, July 31st. Roman Empire and the Fall of Nero offer possible lessons for Trump about the cost of self-isolation. Here's the Times of Israel, Barry, August the 3rd. All roads lead to Rome. How Trump's administration would lead us to a similar fate. And finally, here's the great Neil Ferguson, Hoover historian par excellence. Free Press, June 17th. America is in a late republic state dash like Rome. So, your thoughts? Are you on board with this line of thought?
Well, these are all great people and great ideas, and I'm on board with the idea of using Rome as an analogy. Rome is very good to think with. But I actually think America is not in a late republic situation. I think America has a remarkable ability to reinvent itself. I mean, I
Mhm.
think it's in the American DNA. So I'm not going to sell short. I'm not going to sell America short. I don't think we're about to give up the republic and to move into the empire. Certainly,
So,
we're in a period of growing pains. Of
right.
that, there is no doubt.
Mhm.
But I'm I'm bullish on America.
What is the cautionary tale that Rome offers?
Well, the cautionary tale of Rome offers is that everything changes, nothing
Right.
stays the same, and you have to learn how to roll with the punches and decide what kind of change you want. To
Mhm.
me, the motto that I always think is important comes not from Rome, though it does come from Italy. It comes from this novel, The Leopard, Il Gattopardo,
Mhm.
a Sicilian novel from the 1950s, in which a wise and cynical young character says, if we want things to stay the same, everything has to change. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. You have to accept some changes in order to preserve what's essential. And the Romans were very good about that. That's one
Mhm.
of the reasons for their success. It's one of the reasons why Saint Augustine, a Christian, obviously, is still reading Cicero, a pagan. It's why the Roman Empire can move to Constantinople and yet keep Roman law and essential Roman values, Roman discipline, Roman order.
Right.
So that I think is the lesson for Americans. Things are going to change whether we like them or not. So we have to decide what kind of change we want and how we keep things, what's good about things, the way things are now, and how we keep them.
Was the Roman Republic, was it fatally flawed, or did just circumstances overtake it?
I think that's a really good question, but I guess I would say that it failed to adapt flexibly to
Mhm.
change circumstances. And so the only way for it to adapt was violently to these changed circumstances. And
Mhm.
the changed circumstances are all but a cliche, and that is the institutions that were created to govern a city-state were not created to govern an empire. And
Mhm.
it was one thing for Rome to be governed by a small elite holding annual office when Rome was a city-state in Italy. But when the Roman
Mhm.
Empire stretches 3,000 miles from Edinburgh to Damascus, then you got a problem. And you have to come up with a different way of governing it. It didn't have to be the way that the Romans chose with an imperial monarchy and an increasingly repressive imperial monarchy, but it
Mhm.
certainly had to be different than the government that existed in the Republic. And the Romans had a lot of trouble seeing this. I think that is one problem that every society faces, to understand the change that's coming and to prepare for it and to deal with it in the best manner.
Now, America's founding fathers, Barry, come along about 17 centuries later, and they create a republic. What did the founding fathers do better than Rome?
Well, I think the founding fathers built size into the republic. I think they understood that it was going to expand. They wanted it to expand.
Mhm.
And so they built in a system that had both a federal level and a state level.
Right.
So it was like already a compromise, and there wasn't an attempt to have a centralized government that ran everything. That has a built-in flexibility that the Roman system lacked.
Okay, let's talk about the book. The title again, Jews versus Rome, 2 centuries of rebellion against the world's mightiest people. What prompted you to write this?
Well, uh, two things. One, I'm an ancient historian, but I'm
Mhm.
also an American Jew. And although my specialty is Greece and Rome, I'd long had in mind that I wanted to write a book that brought in Jewish history as well.
Right.
It had been on my radar screen. And then around 2020 or so, I got interested in this particular topic and
Mhm.
began reading up on it. And I noticed something really curious, and that is that ancient Israel and ancient Iran were friends and allies. In
Uh,
fact, their relationship was central to the whole story. So different, of course, than the relationship in 2020 between the State of Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I began to wonder, well, why? Why is it the way it is today? What does history have to teach us about this? And I also felt that although there was excellent, really excellent, impressive scholarship on the subject of the Jewish revolts, that the subject of the Iranian connection was understudied, and I felt that there was a need for a new study that could say more about that. So that was what got me interested in the subject. Those two things, both personal and intellectual.
right. Now, the book, Barry, outlines three rebellions over the course of about 2 centuries. I'll
Yeah,
confess I knew one of the three revolts, but I didn't know the other two. Um,
yeah.
But before we get to the specifics of what caused each of the revolts,
Yeah,
just in a larger question, why did the Jews rebel so often? You would think maybe after the first time and you learned the lesson, you wouldn't do it. Certainly not after the second time, but they did it three
right.
times. Did they expect a different outcome each time, or again, was this just a product of circumstances?
Oh no, they expected a different outcome. I mean, as you know, people are good at saying this time will be different.
Yeah.
And I think the Jews were very much in that category. They were very determined, they were very nationalistic, and they were very resilient. They were also very inspired. These centuries that I write about are the golden era of apocalyptic and messianic thought.
Mhm.
And there's always uh, there are always people who are willing to inspire revolt and to say, we have the full force of God, religion on our side. So there's that. There's also the geostrategic reality that although we might look at the map and think that ancient Israel, which is called Judea in this period,
Right.
we might think that Judea is at the edge of the Roman Empire, as it is. It's actually in the center. It's located between two empires, a Western Empire, Rome, and an Eastern Empire, Parthia, an Iranian empire. And there's a large Jewish diaspora in the Roman Empire, but there's also a large Jewish diaspora in the Parthian Empire. So if you're sitting in Jerusalem and you're thinking, how can I win my country's independence back? And how can I get rid of the Romans? You will naturally look eastward to your co-religionists in the Parthian Empire, but also to the Parthian government and thinking, uh, these people hate the Romans, which they did. Have gone to war with the Romans. Might they not help us if we rebel against the Romans? So I think that is a factor as well. The fact that they're not just religious and nationalistic factors, but geostrategic factors that might encourage someone to rebel. On
Mhm.
top of that, the Romans do not play their cards right. Instead of engaging in a policy of compromise and balance of power, they do for a while, and it works quite well. Instead of doing that, they kind of engage in a winner-take-all policy and they feel they can push around the locals and get away with it. Then, after suppressing the revolt, they then proceed to allow most of the Jews to survive in Judea and elsewhere, but then to humiliate them by imposing a tax on them that nobody else in the empire has to pay. And absolutely turning a deaf ear to Jewish demands to be able to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. In fact, when the Romans do decide to rebuild Jerusalem, they insult the locals by saying, we are rebuilding it, but as a pagan city with temples only to the pagan god in the city, and we're going to give it a new name. We're going to name it after the emperor, Hadrian, and the chief god of Rome, Jupiter. So the city changes its name from Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina. He's Aelius Hadrianus, that's the emperor, and Capitolinus, the chief god of Rome. So this is the Hadrian Jupiter city, is what essentially it means.
So you're telling me that the best and the brightest in Rome understand they have the military might to put down any uprising, any revolt, any rebellion, but they're not thinking strategically and understanding that at the same time they're putting down the revolt, they're also creating conditions for the next revolt.
That's right. Yes, they're not thinking long term. They don't have the right balance in mind as to how to deal with the provincials.
Are there other historical parallels that come to mind when you look at this relationship? I'm thinking empires and dealing with troubled colonies and
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, certainly the 13 colonies and Great Britain. I mean, King George and his government thought that the way to deal with these ungrateful provincials, and the Romans, I think, would also think of the Jews as ungrateful,
right.
is to slap them around, use force, and you're going to win. But they underestimated the provincials. I think the Romans underestimated the Jews as well, although, unlike the Americans, turned to their equivalent of Parthia, which is to say France, and they
Right.
succeeded. Uh, the Jews were not successful in getting Parthia to intervene, and I think that is the essential difference.
All right, let's break down each of the three
Yeah,
revolts that you outlined in the book, Barry. The first one is the one that I'm familiar with. It's the
yeah,
so-called Great Revolt.
yeah,
This leads to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and also is the siege of Masada, which
exactly.
also was a very good TV movie at one point. So
Indeed.
explain how the Great Revolt came to be.
So, Rome conquered Judea in the year 63 BCE,
Mhm.
and by hook or crook, they managed to hold on to it for over a century.
Mhm.
They lose it 25 years after taking it to the Parthians, who invaded, conquered, and put a Parthian king on the throne in Jerusalem. And then the Romans have to fight to get it back. The fight is led by a man who is infamous in history, Herod the Great, who becomes king and rules with an iron fist and
Right.
then some. He doesn't have a competent successor. The Romans eventually fire him and turn Judea into a Roman province. And there's constant turbulence. There are revolts that are put down before they can turn into anything great or all that long term. And the Romans more or less keep order in Judea with a very small force. They don't even have a legion stationed there. Stationed there. The closest legion is in Syria. They've got some auxiliary troops, local carabinieri types who are keeping order there. But under the Emperor Nero, um, the Romans send out a series of vicious, incompetent governors. Even before then, they had sent out vicious, incompetent governors. The most infamous, of course, is Pontius Pilate. That was under
Yes.
Tiberius. And he sets the pattern for what follows. And finally, there's a governor whose orders from Nero is basically to squeeze the provincials until the pipsqueak. And the idea is to take money from the temple to favor the non-Jewish population in Judea. There's a large Greek-speaking population there as well. And when the natives protest, he sends in the troops to massacre them. And there's a massacre of civilians in Jerusalem. That is the last straw for the hotheads who managed to come into power and declare a revolt against Rome.
Mhm.
The governor of Syria, an older guy, maybe not on the top of his game, marches with an army to Jerusalem and attempts to intimidate the locals who are not being intimidated. And then, tail between his legs, he starts to march home again. And the locals ambush the army in a narrow valley leading northwestward from Jerusalem. And when it's over, they manage to massacre the better part of a legion. Now, this is a disaster for Rome. It's not the sort of thing that an imperial power can take lying down. And so Nero decides to send out one of his best generals to the east to put down the rebellion,
Mhm.
which he
And
proceeds.
Masada, Barry, is there any way that Masada could have had a different outcome?
No. Once
And maybe explain what happened at Masada.
So what happened at Masada is Masada is kind of a stop on the Underground Railroad. It's
Yes.
where the last rebels are holed up and where sympathizers with them flee to Masada. It is a huge natural fortress in the Judean desert at the edge of the Dead Sea.
Mhm.
And they go from there to Egypt and other points outside of Judea. There are about 950 people there, many of them women and children. And the Romans are in a mopping up operation after having destroyed Jerusalem, put down the revolt. They want to get rid of the last bastions of rebellion.
Mhm.
So they surround Masada with a legion and then some, and basically say surrender or die. Uh, the defenders of Masada don't have any chance of defeating this Roman legion. The only question is how are the Romans going to get to the top of Masada, and they do this by building a ramp. Um, it's an impressive engineering feat, certainly not a Herculean engineering feat,
Right.
difficult to do, but by no means impossible. The Romans are great engineers. and they are going to take Masada. The defenders fight back to the degree they can, but that's not very great. And they decide that rather than surrender to the Romans, rather than be tortured and see their women and children enslaved, they will engage in a mass killing exercise in which the men kill the other members of their families, then kill each other, and then the final ones commit suicide. So when the Romans go up to the top of Masada, they've reached the top. They expect to fight their way in, but there's no one resisting them. There are only a few people hiding who've survived this massacre who tell the tale, and everybody else is dead. Um,
Mhm.
so could the rebels have defeated the Romans? No. They could have surrendered,
Right.
um, or they could have decided to fight to the last man, and there could have been a bloodbath that way. Those are other possibilities. But victory over the Romans in this case, no, not a possibility.
Right. The second revolt buried the so-called Diaspora Revolt, and here the issue of taxation comes into play.
Yes, it's not. So the Romans, after the first revolt, they punished the Jews everywhere in the Roman Empire, whether they were part of the revolt or not, whether they lived in Judea or not, and they make every Jew in the Roman Empire pay a small annual tax to the chief god of Rome. It's kind of a parody and an insult of the tax that Jews had been paying to the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
Now it has to go to the chief god of Rome. And this is highly insulting to the people who live, to the Jews of the empire. It's also very clear that the Romans are never going to allow them to rebuild the temple.
Mhm.
So they rise in rebellion, but they do so at a very strategic moment. It's when the empire has invaded Parthia, and the empire is in the process of conquering Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia.
Mhm.
Um, just at that time, the Jews of Egypt and Libya and Cyprus rise in rebellion.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, there's a revolt against the Romans, and
Mhm.
the local Jewish population is playing a prominent role in leading and in participating in this revolt against the Romans. So it
Mhm.
looks like this is a coordinated rebellion, east
Mhm.
and west. It's very threatening to Rome. And the empire has to go to great efforts to put it down, which indeed it does.
Right. Now, Barry, there are no cell phones back then. There are
Yeah.
no Zoom calls like we're doing now. So
Yeah.
these are going on concurrently. Is
Yeah.
there any organization going on here, or each had it randomly? And also on top of that, I'm curious, what were the Jews fighting with? Where did they get their weapons, and how did they fight the
Yeah.
Romans?
Great question. Well, in Egypt, so to the first question, how do you coordinate something like this? You
Yeah,
can't coordinate.
in theory, if you take the ancient war, but at least give them the modern tool of communications, you could talk all around the Roman Empire to each other and really just do a rather brilliant job of just how to mount insurrections and complicate life for the Romans. But
Yeah.
you obviously can't communicate in real time like that.
No, you can't communicate in real time, so you can't have a coordinated D-Day, 0 hour, anything like that.
Right.
Uh, but there are ways to get messages back and forth. There are people who can travel. There
Mhm.
are people who are expert at getting messages over difficult terrain. There's also
Right.
fire signals, which are an important way of communication in the ancient world. So, yeah, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And we know of uh, the border. We know that the border between the Parthian Empire and the Roman Empire was porous. There are people crossing over it all the time. So it's not beyond uh, the human ingenuity to get messages back and forth. After all, the Romans had to get the message from the east. Gee, there's a rebellion going on in the west. We better send an army from the Mesopotamia to Egypt to put down this rebellion. So yeah, there are lots of ways to get messages back and forth,
Mhm.
though we don't know any of the details as to
Right.
how that
Now, tools and weapons that the Jews were fighting with.
Tools and weapons. So in Egypt, there are Jews serving as soldiers in the Roman army of occupation as
Mhm.
Egypt, and many of them come from military families. They've been serving as soldiers even earlier when Cleopatra and the Ptolemies were governing Egypt. Large Jewish population in Egypt, so they would have had weapons that way. In Libya, I don't think they're serving as soldiers then, but they had served as soldiers, and so they'd have weapons in family weapons. They'd have military traditions. We know of lots of rebellions in the ancient world where people made their own weapons, as indeed in the Third Jewish Revolt they do. So, yeah, I don't think it's any problem to get weapons. They can break into armories. They can get weapons that way as well.
Are they similarly armed, Barry, or is this the case of what is the cliche, bringing a knife to a gunfight?
I think it's bringing a knife to a gunfight, but remember that the Romans don't have guns, and yeah, if you have a full legion that's prepared and in battle order, then the knife is not going to work in that particular gunfight. But if
Mhm.
you surprise the enemy and they're not ready for you, they're sleeping,
Right,
then you have a real chance.
right. And the Great Revolt, Barry, and the Diaspora Revolt, how long did each one last?
So the Great Revolt lasted for 4 years, and then the mopping up operations take place a few years afterwards. The
Right.
Diaspora Revolt basically lasts for about a year.
A year.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the third revolt, and feel free to correct me here if I get it wrong. The Bar Kokhba Revolt. Is that
Very close. Bar
close?
Kokhba is how an Israeli would pronounce it. I
Okay.
think an American would say Bar Kokhba, but yeah, Bar Kokhba, very good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And this succeeds in creating an independent state for a while, but the story here seems to be that the third time is not the charm,
Right.
and Rome seemed to have said enough, enough. And what results out of this, Barry, is ugly by modern standards. We're talking genocide, we're talking enslavement, we're talking depopulation. In other words,
Yeah.
Rome drops the hammer.
Yeah. Let's add ethnic cleansing to it as
Ethnic
well.
cleansing.
Yeah. So, I mean,
So what
briefly,
was what was different about this revolt, Barry? And then from the
so
Roman side, why did they decide, okay, this is it?
okay, what's different about it is a couple of things. First, the rebels are very ingenious. They said, we've learned our lessons. We're not going to take on the legions. We're going to engage in irregular warfare.
Okay.
And they prepare both by making their own weapons, by the way, and also, as you very astutely asked in terms of the second revolt, but also by preparing underground shelters, digging
Right.
tunnels, using caves. Hiding themselves in places where the Romans wouldn't expect. And they burst on the Romans like a storm. The Romans are utterly unprepared for this, and they inflict very heavy casualties on the Romans. And the
Mhm.
Romans are forced to scramble in various ways, and it takes them a couple of years before they can put the revolt down. And the only way to put it down is painstakingly, you know, rebel site by rebel site, tunnel by tunnel, they have to
Mhm.
take over, they have to put down the revolt. The other thing that makes the Romans so uh, testy about this revolt is that it takes place in the shadow of Rome's defeat in Parthia.
Mhm.
So Rome's attempt to invade the Parthian Empire is an utter failure, complete defeat. The emperor dies of probably a stroke during this, and his successor is uh, basically wants to pull all the troops out of the Parthian Empire and peace on the border. But he knows that A, Rome has been humiliated in its attempt to conquer Parthia, and B, that the Jews in both the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire have played no small role in Rome's defeat. So a rebellion in Judea, of all places, is now pushing every single button that the Romans have when they see how vulnerable they are on the eastern frontier. And
And from the Roman standpoint, why didn't Rome consider a final solution?
It's not because the Romans are nice guys. It's because it's actually kind of difficult to massacre every man, woman, and child of a population.
Right.
Given
So now we're back into modern times. They don't have rail systems. They can't cart thousands upon thousands of people to concentration camps and kill them, right?
No, you have to kill people the old-fashioned way, one by one.
One by one.
Besides which, this is a society that deals in human flesh. It's a slave society.
Right.
Much better to sell people into slavery, exile them and sell them into slavery, than to simply massacre them. But the Romans did feel that they had engaged in the equivalent of a final solution.
Mhm.
They basically wiped out a large part of the Jewish population, and there are very few Jews living in the heart of the Jewish homeland, the area known as Judah or Judea, the area around
Mhm.
Jerusalem. Um, significant Jewish populations survive in the north, in Galilee and the Golan. But the Romans also, um, to put the icing on the cake, they changed the name of the province from Judea to Syria, Palestina. So from
Right.
Judea to Palestine, which is a signal that the Romans are no longer going to deal with the Jewish population of Judea as the local intermediaries. Instead, they're going to deal with the Greek-speaking population who thought of the country as Palestine rather than Judea or Israel, which would have been, I think, the traditional name that Jews would have used. So, um, to that extent, the Romans are engaged in a quote unquote final solution.
And talk a bit, Barry, about the mindset of the Jews after this rebellion is crushed. They have physically crushed the Jews. Have they
Right.
spiritually crushed the Jews?
No, they haven't spiritually crushed the Jews at all. And admittedly, it's dicey. It's dicey as to what's going to happen.
Right.
But I think we can say that after what happens is that the rabbinic movement emerges. It had already begun to emerge after the first revolt, but it comes into its own around the year 200 with the
Mhm.
compilation of the Mishnah, which is a detailed religious text that writes down Jewish laws that previously had only been oral law and passed on from generation to generation. They're now written down and they give Jews a foundation for those who want to continue their religion, but by different means. They no longer have the temple in Jerusalem. Instead, they will engage in daily religious services to keep the religion going, and they will follow the whole cycle of holidays that they used to follow in the temple. They will now do so by other means. It doesn't take root overnight. It takes centuries for this to be developed. But the basic idea is spiritual resistance. The Jews will be spiritually resist Rome spiritually, but physically they'll accept Roman rule. They will be good citizens of the Roman Empire. They will be humble before the emperor and his minions. They will no longer rebel. In fact, there still are some rebellions, but there are no major rebellions along the lines of the three that I wrote about.
Let's circle back, Barry, to ancient Iran and the other empire, the Parthian Empire, which
Yeah,
I believe runs from about 247 BC to 224 AD. This is a
indeed.
vast stretch of land from the Euphrates to the Himalayas. They control the
Right.
Silk Road. Tell us a bit about what they're doing in the midst of all of this. Are they egging on the Jews? Are they arming the Jews? Are they kind of playing mischief maker here? Or are they trying to have a very light involvement so as to not get into a direct fight with Rome? Or all of the
Well, yeah, all of the above in a sense, but the bottom line is they're not going to get directly involved. I
yeah,
mean, imagine that you're the king of France and the American Revolution is going on, and the Americans don't win the Battle of Saratoga.
right,
They have some victories, but it's not at all clear that they're going to pull this off. So
right.
you probably wouldn't make an alliance with the fledgling American Republic. I
Mhm.
think the Parthians are in a similar position. They're unimpressed uh, by what the Jewish rebels have done. This is very nice, but let's see a real victory over the Romans. And the rebels don't come up with that real victory. On top of which, they've got their own fish to fry elsewhere.
Mhm.
The Parthians have won a big victory over Rome in Armenia, which is a
Right.
larger country in antiquity than it is today. They want to hold on to that. They don't especially want to incite the Romans against them. That being said, so the Parthian Empire has a series of vassal kinglets within it,
Mhm.
and one of the more interesting ones from our point of view is the ancient equivalent of Iraqi Kurdistan, a place called
Mhm.
Adiabene. The royal dynasty there has converted to Judaism about 20, 25 years before the Great Revolt. And they
Mhm.
send their sons, or some of them, to Jerusalem to be educated. And they are there at the time of the revolt. They support the revolt. They fight for the rebels. Um, we know of a small number, a handful of leading Parthians
Mhm.
who are in Jerusalem fighting for the rebels. And we can only assume that there are a lot more than this small number. We're dependent for the information on Josephus, who is taking pains to downplay Jewish connections to Parthia. So I suspect there were more, but not enough to turn the tide against Rome and the revolt.
All right, let's move to modern times now, Barry.
Yeah,
And I want you to talk about two things. Number one, how all of this applies to today's friends that Israel's have, the United States and others, and conversely, Israel's enemies.
right. So, I mean, I think one lesson that both is friends and enemies of Israel can take from this is that the Jews are very determined people.
Right.
The fact that they were crazy enough to engage in these three revolts, and then they were able to turn around and say, well, we didn't survive through physical resistance, but we will survive through spiritual resistance, tells us that these are people who are willing to fight and people who have a huge resource of resilience and determination
Mhm.
to draw on. That's something that we need to keep in mind today at looking at today's struggles. Um,
So you're
Second,
suggesting that perhaps when you look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, that Hamas, Iran made a big miscalculation.
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I think they made a huge miscalculation. I think they thought it was going to be relatively easy to topple Israel and its people. I think they underestimated the strength and resilience
Or
of
at least, or at least wear down Israel, have the Israeli public become tired of war, and then have some sort of settlement after that. I think that's the great miscalculation here. I don't think they
yeah,
recognize that Israel would go in as tough as they did in the Gaza and would
yeah,
stay in as long as they've stayed in.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that if they had looked at history more, they would have understood that. Um,
Okay. And the lesson here for America's friends, the same one, just Israel is tough.
Yeah, Israel is tough. Israel isn't going anywhere. The Jews have a huge history to draw on,
Uh-huh.
a huge fountain of experience. And also, for at least a significant part of the Israeli population, they have religious resources as well
Uh-huh.
that give them strength. So, I think that's very important for people to realize. Also, just for the American audience in particular, also some of the Western audience, there seems to be this notion somehow that Israel is a colonial settler state, quote unquote.
Yes.
That the Jews came from Poland, the cliche goes, and they threw an arrow at the map, and somehow they ended on Palestine, and that's where they decided they would go as if they
Right.
had no connection to it. But in fact, Jewish history in Israel or Palestine, call it what you will, goes back at least 3,000 years, just
Uh-huh.
based on secular sources, to say nothing of the Bible. And there has been a continuous Jewish presence there, although a small one, for many years since ancient times. And the Jewish religion has always emphasized the land of Israel, the desire to return to Israel, to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. So these aren't just any old place where they
Right.
decided to settle. This Israel is the place.
Right. Now we have a challenge here in this country, Barry, and it's one of Americans and their knowledge of history.
Yes,
If you did pop quizzes, the average American on the roots of the revolution,
right.
they would vastly fail. I can tell you, years and years ago, I worked for a governor of California. I was a speechwriter. I ran a
Uh-huh.
speechwriting office every summer. We'd have college kids coming in
Right.
interning. I'm talking very bright kids, Barry, from great California colleges. And the jerk that I am, I would give them a quiz on American history.
Yeah.
Morbidly curious about what they knew. They knew nothing before California statehood, is the point here. That they knew nothing about what caused the American
Right.
Revolution, nothing about taxation without representation, didn't understand the nuances between republic and democracy, and so on and so forth. Here's my question to you, Barry, and I don't know how familiar you are with Israeli education, but if I were to talk to kids in Israeli schools right now, are they being educated on these revolts? Do they understand that it's not just Israel from 1947 to present, that we're talking millennia of hardship and struggle?
Oh, absolutely. I
Mhm.
mean, everybody in Israel has heard of Bar Kokhba. I mean,
Okay.
without question, there's a holiday in the spring, a religious holiday, which Zionism has also connected with Bar Kokhba,
Mhm.
and he celebrated kindergarten schools and kindergarten students sing songs about him. I think everybody knows about Masada, and everybody knows about the fall of Jerusalem and the temple. The surviving foundation wall of the temple, the western wall,
Mhm.
is I would say, a national shrine. So yes, I mean, huge education. I mean, in Israel, as in no less in Israel than in the United States, kids scoff at history and scoff at education, but certainly they're told about it, and I think probably know much more about it than the Americans do about their history. Let's not forget that in Israel, there's mandatory military service for every Jewish man and women. Certain
Right.
ultra-Orthodox have a carve-out, but that makes a huge difference when you know that you're going to go into the military, and it makes people much more civic-minded and much more patriotic than they are in the United States. Also,
Okay.
the calendar, the weekly calendar in Israel is a Jewish calendar,
Mhm.
with Saturday being the day of rest, Sunday is a work day, and even very secular people tend to have a Friday night dinner, a Shabbat dinner with the family in a way that, say, American Jews often don't.
All right, Barry, let's close with what we began with, and let's go back to the American Republic and
Yes.
that great man with the very biblical name, Benjamin Franklin. And of course, you've heard the quote a million times, probably. He's asked during the formation of the Constitution, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic, of democracy, monarchy, or republic? And what does Franklin say? Quote, republic, if you can keep it. So, final
Yeah.
question, Barry, are you bullish or bearish right now on the chances of the American Republic?
Bullish because I think people realize that it's in danger, and they realize that our educational system and our cultural system have not been serving us well, for the last generation or two where they have gone. And they realize that we need to change them and change them in big ways. It will not be the job of a day. It will be not be the job of one administration to change them. It will take much longer than that, but the wheels are turning and the changes are starting to happen. I see them with my own eyes and what's going on in higher education. And all I can say is it's about time. Thank heavens. Now we need these changes, in many different spheres of society. And I think Americans are very energetic people and they are educable. So I,
Mhm.
I think change is coming, change is happening, and it will make society better and stronger.
Barry, I enjoyed the conversation, and it's truly an honor and a privilege to have you here at the Hoover Institution. I think one of the great stories of this institution is over about the past 10 years or so, we have created a marvelous, marvelous bench of historians. I would argue, Barry, that our top tier of historians matches that of any university in America when you're looking at the likes of Victor Davis Hanson and Neil Ferguson and Stephen Kotkin and so forth. These are just people who are just at the apex. And it's an honor to have you as part of that delegation.
Thank you. The honor is mine, I assure you. It's great to
Okay.
be here.
You've been listening to Matters of Policy and Politics, a Hoover Institution podcast. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our show. If you wouldn't mind, please spread the word. Tell your friends about us. The Hoover Institution has Facebook, Instagram, and X feeds. Our Hex handle happens to be at Hoover Inst. That's spelled HOOVERINST. Barry Strauss, brave man that he is, he's on X. His X handle is at Barry Strauss. That's spelled BARRYSTRAUSS. The book we've been discussing, its title once again is Jews versus Rome, 2 Centuries of Rebellion Against the World's Mightiest Empire. You can buy it now. I recommend that you do. While you're at it, I recommend you go to our website, which is hoover.org, and sign up for the Hoover Daily Report, which delivers the best from Barry Strauss and his Hoover colleagues to your inbox weekdays. For the Hoover Institution, this is Bill Whalen. We'll be back soon with a new installment of Matters of Policy and Politics. Until next time, take care, and thanks for joining us today.
This podcast is a production of the Hoover Institution, where we generate and promote ideas advancing freedom. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.